Hello. Just in case you missed our Engage Teaching Workshop today, Friday, November 18th, here's a quick walkthrough video of what we discussed. So we began by taking a look at our map of studying Engage Teaching. We've talked about foundations, planning, and we are talking about the climate piece of the Engage Teaching model. We had a workshop last week called Engaging Students, and today talking about supporting community. We also talked about a badge that will be coming soon for people who have attended 5 of the Engage Teaching topic, which we'll be sharing at our Chatty Awards in the spring. So please feel free to join in if you haven't already. Then we talked about what our agenda would be. And again, going back to the weekly model of what, why, and how. So we began with what supporting community in our classrooms looks like, why being the research on community, and there's quite a bit of research on community in classrooms, and then how promoting and engaging community members and building a community online. So we are reflecting back on this guiding question through each of our meetings together. What is it that we want students to know, and what do we want them to be able to do with that information? And that was the foundation of our planning meetings, where we discussed goals, outcomes, assessing student learning, and then climate. Last week, we talked about how we engage students through our classroom climate, and this week focusing on building a sense of community in our classroom. So we talked about in the knowing what piece about community, we discussed this quote from Patricia Cross, who's helping guide our Engage Teaching discussions. College graduates frequently report that some of their richest learning experiences in college come from interacting with their fellow students. So we know that community is receiving more attention in higher education in recent years. And we know there's a lot of brain research that's been done over the last 3 decades around student community. So we were meeting today to talk about what does community mean for us in a given course, and how do we know what it looks like when we see it in our courses. So we began with some research around communities and in classrooms, and we referred to McMillan and Chavez, which is an early publication around community in classrooms, and talking about how that's changed over time. So there are 7 pieces to McMillan and Chavez's work, or it can be divided into these 7 pieces. And that would be contact. How often are students having contact with each other? And it doesn't have to be in-person contact. It can be virtual contact with each other. But the research saying things like keeping students in particular groups for extended, quote unquote, whatever that means, period of time helps build community. So rather than, and thinking about our 7-week model, we may want to consider having students participate collaboratively in some things throughout the 7 weeks, instead of maybe switching every couple of weeks, to help build that strong sense of community together, particularly when we're thinking about asynchronous or courses, different ways that we can do that. And we discussed that. We also talked about the quality of interaction. So what is the interaction amongst the students? Responding transactionally on a discussion board is one way for students to have established relationships with each other. But there are other ways through discussions, even meeting live synchronously, like our group did this afternoon, can help enhance the quality of the interaction, even in online courses. And the importance of having closure to events. So having many successes along the way. So even if you have a long-term project that's, say, going to take the whole 7-week session that's going to be worked on collaboratively or individually, how can we set up ending points or many goals that they can achieve collaboratively in your classroom as part of your classroom community to get those successes? Part of that brain compatible feedback model. So we talked about that. How can we can celebrate celebrate success and build community by having benchmarks. Having shared events both in the school setting but outside of the school setting. So talking about like undergraduate research fair or presenting our capstone project, but also having some shared events that are offered outside, perhaps a gathering where students meet off campus, or a community event, or a community event that's brought to campus where students can have a sense of community outside of just the course time. Investment. So investing in the class as a community, particularly through shared experiences, like we mentioned, in shared events, but also taking space to be able to be transparent about how we are feeling or reacting to events that are occurring in our world and in our community, and being mindful of how we discuss that and bring compatible, being mindful of biases and microaggressions is ways for us to show that we invest in our community and each other. Recognition and honor. So aside from having closure to events and celebrating those kinds of things, recognizing efforts, recognizing participation, and honoring growth is an important part of community building. And then the community itself, its community spirit, its sense of purpose is another way to engage with the community. So we have this really interesting research in the mid-'80s from McMillan and Chavez, and then we know how things have changed over time and what pieces of this apply to our lives now, and the way in which we are teaching in really a hybrid space, or completely asynchronous or synchronous space online. So our next step was to revisit something that we had looked at last week. So last week, in our first bubble of the climate piece of the engaged teaching model, we talked about student engagement, and we made a Jamboard saying what we thought student engagement looked like, sound like, and feels like. This week, we made a Jamboard as a whole group using those same 3 categories, but talking about it in terms of what community looks like, sounds like, and feels like. So this is a picture of our finished Jamboard, and you can see these are all of the many ways that people talked about what community looks like in their classroom and sounds like and feels like, and feels like. And we had a great discussion around this, and how we ourselves build community with our students and how we observe community amongst themselves occurring. And we talked about ways that we have learned over time as educators to help enhance community. And we also talked about areas where we want to grow in that space, and in particular, what types of strategies can help with online teaching and building community. Then we return back to the engaged teaching model and 4 components that are discussed in that engaged teaching model around building rapport. So using students' name and pronouncing them correctly is one technique that's suggested in that model, and that was part of our Jamboard. Another is to maintain a friendly and supportive tone in our communications with students. And again, we talked about how we have future studies and collaborative studies going along right now with CARE in digital body language and upcoming events, and recognizing biases and microaggressions. We talked about reducing the barriers implicit in teacher-student roles, and that goes right along with that. And then getting the importance of getting to know students as individuals. And we strategize ways that we do that, even with online classes, even with asynchronous classes, setting aside time where we can have some of live interactions with students, either virtually or in person, helps to build those relationships, and ways that we might be able to encourage that amongst students in asynchronous, synchronous, and in-person settings. Then we revisited the brain and what we know about the brain. And this is a model that we've looked at in terms of universal design guidelines, and the website's on the slide. But we also talked about it in terms of what we know about fight or flight and parts of the brain, and having an absence of threat helping to build community. So we talked about how in your brainstem, the fight or flight part of your brain, and we talked about that's the what piece, like how do I attend to this information that I see, that I am experiencing? Then the why is this important? So I'm moving my hands up a little bit. Why is this important to me? Is important for me to learn? And then how am I going to go about doing this? What are the tasks and goals I need to achieve to accomplish this learning? And the ways in which we may cause our brain to downshift if we feel threatened or we don't feel included. And we revisited something that has been a part in other CARE workshops before, and that is teaching with the brain in mind and how that relates to community. So emotion, driving attention, learning, and memory, and spending a little bit of time with Susan Kovalik, who this teaching and learning about the brain also is parallel research to community. And we talked about her brain compatible elements that have been part of her teaching model for a long time, and how it meshes with the engaged teaching model that is this modern teaching model that we're looking at that infuses brain research. We talked about each of these body-brain compatible elements briefly. And then we ended off with the knowing how piece related to online teaching. So these are some tips from the engaged teaching model that we find complete overlap in person, but creating a plan for communication, how you as the faculty member will engage with students, how will you communicate information to them is very important all the time, in particular online. So we talked about strategies for this, like we might have videos where we show students where to find things, and we're clear and consistent at the start of the course, how you will communicate with them. When will your emails occur? Where will the emails come from? Where will things be posted? How will they find things? But then also with your students, co-collaborating and saying, what is your plan for communicating with me? So you're going to put your name on everything in this particular way, or store files this way, or upload things here. You will email me through our LMS system, or how you like to do that, and being consistent in your course and with other courses, and being collaborative with your colleagues so that things are consistent for students. That helps them feel included. That contributes to community building. Being mindful of digital body language. We talked briefly about that. We have done some workshops on digital body language through CARE in the past, and what that looks like, and how you how you punctuate your communication communicates about your feelings or perceived feelings. Avoid using abbreviations and acronyms, and be directional. Sometimes, even if it's an acronym or an abbreviation that you suspect students should know really well, spell it out in digital communication and online teaching, and be directional. Help guide them to places where they need to go for their work. So if you're putting out a communication and you want students to upload something to a particular place, even though that's part of your plan for communication, include the link. So when students are reading that announcement, they can click on the link and go directly there, even if you think they should already know. And then meet in real time whenever possible. So if it's possible in your asynchronous classes to set aside time for you to meet synchronously or live, helps increase community. It helps put some of that digital body language and space into the relationship so that you're building rapport with the students. It also helps for them as well. And we talked about how we have to be careful about that. Students apply for asynchronous classes because it fits their lifestyle and what it is that they need to do in terms of family and work responsibilities. It increases community if you are able to offer some opportunities to meet in real time, but it's not an essential piece. It's something that is worth considering. Many of us talked about how we offer a series of short one-on-one meetings, like faculty meetings, with students to help them have time to answer questions one-on-one. And we discussed how that could look like a variety of different modalities. And then we ended off our time together revisiting our agenda and talking about how we discussed each piece in our short 1 hour together. So thank you for watching this walkthrough.